A generous woman named Catherine helps a hungry young boy named Timothy during a difficult moment, an act of kindness she never expected would lead to anything more. But 10 years later, Timothy returns, and Catherine's quiet life is about to change in ways she never imagined. As Timothy's gratitude grows, so does his desire to give back to the woman who showed him kindness when he needed it most. What was it about that simple meal that left such a lasting impression on Timothy, and how did his journey bring Catherine's life full circle in a way neither of them could have anticipated? Let's find out. But before diving into the story, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this tale of gratitude and second chances, don't forget to subscribe. The worn-out small houses of the neighborhood sat quietly under the cloudy afternoon sky, a light drizzle dampening the cracked sidewalks and worn-out streets. Catherine had lived here for years, content with her simple life. She wasn't rich by any means, but she always made sure to share what she had. Whether it was a kind word, a shared meal, or a warm smile, her neighbors knew her as someone who never hesitated to help. It wasn't about money or material things, it was just who she was. Catherine had just finished her shift at the community center, where she worked part-time as a caregiver. The salary wasn't much, but it kept the lights on and food on the table. Today had been a long day, and the weight of exhaustion settled into her bones as she hurried towards the grocery store. She needed to buy some essentials: bread, milk, maybe some vegetables if they were on sale. As she walked, her umbrella barely shielding her from the rain, Catherine noticed a figure sitting near the entrance of the store. It was a boy curled up against the wall, soaked despite his thin jacket. He looked about 8 or 9 years old, his blonde hair matted against his forehead, and his small body shivering from the cold. Catherine slowed her pace, her heart tightening in her chest. She recognized the look on his face. It wasn't just the cold, it was hunger. She had seen it before in the community, especially among children whose families were struggling. This boy looked worse off than most. Though his clothes were worn, his sneakers had holes, and his eyes, despite their droopiness, held a deep sadness. Without a second thought, Catherine approached him. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently, crouching down to be at eye level. "Are you all right?" The boy looked up, surprised, his blue eyes wide and wary. He didn't say anything at first, just shook his head slightly. Catherine's heart broke for him. "Looks like you're cold and hungry," she said softly. "Have you eaten today?" He hesitated and then shook his head again. "No, ma'am." Catherine knew what it was like to be hungry, though she did everything she could to prevent it, but for a child, that wasn't right. She couldn't just walk by knowing she had food at home and a little money in her pocket. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked. "Timothy," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Well, Timothy," Catherine smiled kindly. "How about I get you something to eat? There's a restaurant just down the street, and I'm sure you could use a hot meal." Timothy looked at her in surprise. It was clear he hadn't expected a stranger to offer him food, especially not a woman like Catherine, someone who didn't know him at all. His mother had always warned him to be careful of strangers, but there was something different about Catherine. She wasn't asking for anything in return, and her eyes only showed concern. "I don't want to bother you, ma'am," Timothy said quietly. "You don't have to," Catherine responded with a wider smile. "It's no bother at all. We all need a little help sometimes, and today is your turn. Come on, let's get you something warm." Timothy hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. His stomach growled, and the idea of hot food was too tempting to resist. Catherine held out her hand, and with a shy look, Timothy took it. The rain kept falling, but together they walked the short distance to the restaurant. Inside, the warmth of the small diner was a welcome relief from the cold rain outside. Catherine and Timothy sat in a booth near the window, and she called over the waitress, an older woman who knew Catherine well. "What can I get you today?" the waitress asked with a smile. "Bring me whatever this young man wants," Catherine replied, nodding towards Timothy. Timothy's eyes widened. He wasn't used to being asked what he wanted. Usually, it was just whatever they could afford, which wasn't much. He looked at the menu, his mouth watering at the sight of burgers, fries, and milkshakes. Can I get a burger and fries?" he asked timidly. "Of course you can," Catherine said. And a milkshake for him, on me." The waitress smiled warmly and jotted down the order before heading to the kitchen. Timothy looked at Catherine, still in disbelief. "Thank you, ma'am. You didn't have to do this." "I know," she replied. "But sometimes it's just the right thing to do." There was a brief silence between them, filled only by the clattering of dishes and the quiet murmur of conversations around them. Timothy stared at the table, unsure of what to say. Catherine couldn't bear to let him feel alone. He wasn't used to talking about his problems, but she knew from experience that sometimes people just needed someone to listen. "So, Timothy," she began softly, "do you live nearby?" He nodded. "Yes, it's just my mom and me. She lost her job a few months ago, and things have been tough." Catherine nodded, understanding all too well. "I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart. Times are tough right now, but you're not alone. There are good people around, and things can get better." Timothy swallowed, blinking back tears that threatened to fall. "I try to help her as much as I can, but sometimes it just isn't enough. Sometimes we run out of food, and I hate seeing her cry." Catherine's heart broke for the boy sitting across from her. She could see how much he loved his mother and how much it hurt him to see her struggle. It reminded her of the tough times she had faced, moments when she had to rely on the kindness of others to get by. "I understand, Timothy," she said. "You're doing the best you can, and that's more than enough. Never think it's your fault. Your mom is lucky to have you." The food arrived, and Timothy's eyes lit up when the plate was set in front of him. He hadn't had a meal like this in what felt like forever. He began eating eagerly, but Catherine noticed how carefully he ate, slowly savoring each bite. She smiled to herself, feeling a warmth spread through her chest as she watched Timothy eat. Catherine reached into her bag and pulled out a small container wrapped in foil. It was some leftover stew she had made the night before, nothing fancy, but it was hearty and filling. She slid it across the table to Timothy. "This is for your mom," she said softly. "I thought she might appreciate a hot meal too." Timothy looked at the container and then at Catherine, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "She's going to be so happy. We haven't had much food lately." Catherine nodded, her heart swelling. "I'm glad I could help. And don't worry, Timothy. Things will get better. Sometimes life turns around when you least expect it." Timothy smiled, a small but genuine smile that warmed Catherine's heart. It wasn't just the food that mattered to him. It was the fact that someone cared enough to notice, to help without asking for anything in return. He hadn't felt that in a long time, and it meant more to him than words could express. As they finished their meal, the rain outside had lessened to a gentle drizzle. Catherine paid the bill, and together they walked back towards the grocery store where they had first met. The streets were quiet now, the day fading. By evening, when they reached the spot where Timothy had been sitting earlier, he turned to Catherine with a shy but grateful smile. "Thank you again, ma'am," he said softly. "I won't forget this, I promise." Catherine smiled, her eyes shining warmly. "Just take care of yourself, Timothy, and take care of your mom. That's all the thanks I need." He nodded, clutching the container of stew tightly in his hands. Catherine watched as he turned and began to walk towards his home, disappearing into the distance. She stood there for a moment, watching the rain fall, feeling a deep sense of peace. She hadn't done much, just offered a meal and a few kind words, but she knew it could make a big difference, and somehow, deep down, she felt that this wouldn't be the last time she saw Timothy. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness have a way of coming back when you least expect them. The years passed, and life did not get any easier for Timothy. The modest one-bedroom apartment where he lived with his mother became a place of growing struggle. His mother, a strong and determined woman, worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat, from cleaning houses to working night shifts at a nearby laundromat. She gave everything she had to provide for them, but despite her efforts, they were trapped in the relentless cycle of poverty. Timothy, now a teenager, had grown used to the gnawing feeling of hunger, the cold seeping through his worn clothes, and the exhaustion of watching his mother work herself to the bone. He knew she was doing everything she could, but the weight of their situation often felt unbearable. He wasn't a stranger to hardship, but the emotional toll was what truly wore him down. At school, Timothy felt like an outsider. His secondhand clothes that no longer fit well made him an easy target for bullies. The kids at school had a talent for spotting weaknesses, and to them, Timothy was easy prey. They taunted him relentlessly, calling him names, making fun of his worn-out shoes and too small backpack. "Hey, Timmy, where'd you get those shoes?" "The trash," one of the boys mocked, sending a wave of laughter through the crowd. Timothy learned to keep his head down, walking through the hallways with his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. The constant teasing and bullying made him feel isolated, as though he lived on the fringes of a world in which he didn't quite belong. He had no friends at school, only acquaintances who tolerated him when they needed help with homework. Still, despite everything, Timothy carried a quiet strength within him, and at the center of that strength was a memory, a single act of kindness that had stayed with him over the years. He often thought of the day Catherine bought him a meal and gave him food to take home to his mother. It was a small thing, just a brief moment in time, but it meant the world to him. Whenever things got particularly tough, Timothy would close his eyes and remember Catherine's face, her kind smile, the warmth in her voice. That simple meal gave him a sense of worth, a reminder that there were good people in the world who cared. It was that memory that kept him going, even when everything else seemed bleak. One particularly cold night, Timothy sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment. The dim light from the single hanging lamp cast long shadows on the walls. His mother was still working, and he had already finished his homework, though his heart wasn't in it. The cold in the apartment was intense, as they couldn't afford to keep the heat on all the time. Timothy sat there, staring at the empty space on the table, lost in his thoughts. His mind drifted back to Catherine once again. He hadn't seen her since that day years ago, but he had never forgotten her. He wondered how she was doing, if she even remembered him. The thought lingered in his mind, and before he knew it, an idea took hold of him. He needed to tell her how much her kindness meant to him. Maybe she had no idea how much that small act had impacted his life. Maybe she thought it had been just another day, just another meal, but to Timothy, it had meant everything. Without a second thought, Timothy got up and rummaged through his mother's desk drawer, looking for a piece of paper and a pen. He didn't know where Catherine lived, but he remembered the grocery store where they had first met. He thought he could deliver the letter there, and maybe the employees would know how to contact her. Sitting back down at the kitchen table, Timothy took a deep breath, the pen hovering over the paper for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. Then, slowly and carefully, he began to write. "Dear Catherine, I don't know if you remember me, but I am Timothy, the boy you helped many years ago outside the grocery store. I was sitting there, cold and hungry, and you came over and bought me a meal. You even gave me some food to take home to my mom. I never got the chance to tell you this, but that day changed my life. You probably didn't think much of it, but your kindness gave me hope when I didn't have much. My mom and I have been struggling for a long time, and things haven't gotten much better. But always I've held on to that memory. It reminded me that there are good people in the world, people who care even when you least expect it. There were times when I felt like giving up, especially with all the bullying at school and the weight of our financial struggles. But every time things got tough, I thought of you. Your generosity gave me strength, and it still does. I wanted to thank you. Thank you for seeing me that day, for caring about me, and for giving me something to hold on to. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I know that I will always remember your kindness. It's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I hope that one day I can make a difference in someone's life, just as you did in mine. With gratitude, Timothy." As he finished writing the letter, Timothy felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was something. He folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a sense of completion. He didn't know if Catherine would ever receive it, but that wasn't the point. Writing the letter had given him a sense of peace, a chance to express what he had been holding inside for so long. The next day, after school, Timothy headed to the grocery store. It was a cold, windy afternoon, the kind that makes your breath hang in the air like mist. As he arrived at the store, his heart pounded with nervous anticipation. He wasn't sure what he expected, but He felt a deep sense of purpose in delivering the letter. He approached the store manager, an older man with a kind appearance, silver hair and glasses. "I'm looking for a woman named Catherine, and I hope you know her," Timothy explained. Catherine," the manager said thoughtfully, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, I know her. She's a regular customer, always comes in for groceries. Very nice lady. Why do you need her?" Timothy hesitated for a moment, then lifted the envelope. "I just wanted to give her this. It's a letter. She helped me a long time ago, and I wanted to thank her." The manager smiled kindly. "Well, I'll make sure she gets it the next time she comes by. Don't worry, son. I'll take care of it." Relief flooded over Timothy as he handed the letter to the manager. "Thank you, sir." The manager nodded, giving Timothy a reassuring pat on the shoulder before Timothy turned to leave. As he walked away from the store, his steps felt lighter, his heart a little less burdened. He had done what he could, and that was enough for now. Several days later, Catherine was making her usual trip to the grocery store when the manager called out to her from behind the counter. "Catherine, I have something for you," the manager said. She approached with a curious smile. "What is it?" The manager reached under the counter and pulled out the envelope. "A young man came by the other day, said his name was Timothy.
He wanted you to have this," he said.
Catherine's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Timothy's name. She hadn't seen or heard from him in years, but she had never forgotten the boy she had helped that rainy afternoon. With trembling hands, she took the envelope. Her curiosity piqued. "Thank you," she said softly, her mind already racing as she slipped the letter into her purse. Later that afternoon, back at home, Catherine sat at her kitchen table, the letter resting in front of her. She stared at it for a moment, a mix of emotions swirling within her. Slowly, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. As she read Timothy's words, a wave of emotion washed over her. She remembered that day vividly, the way Timothy had looked so lost, so vulnerable, sitting in the rain. It had seemed like such a small thing to buy him a meal and give him some food to take home, but now, reading his letter, Catherine realized just how much it had meant to him. Tears filled her eyes as she reached the end of the letter. Timothy's gratitude, his heartfelt words, touched her deeply. She had always believed in the power of kindness, but reading Timothy's letter reaffirmed that belief in a way she hadn't expected. She carefully folded the letter, placing it back in the envelope, and tucked it away in her nightstand drawer. She knew she would keep it there as a reminder of how even the smallest acts of compassion could leave a lasting impact. Timothy's words would stay with her as a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of human connection. In her heart, Catherine knew that Timothy would be okay. He had the strength, resilience, and kindness to carry him through any challenge he faced. And as for Catherine, she would always remember the young boy she had met outside the grocery store, the boy whose life she had touched and who, in turn, had touched hers. The sun rose over the bustling city, its golden rays shining over the sleek skyscrapers and busy streets. In a modern office on the top floor of one of those buildings, Timothy stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the urban landscape below. At 32 years old, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, a far cry from the thin, hungry boy he had once been. The past decade had been a whirlwind of change and growth for Timothy. After years of struggle and hard work, he had managed to earn a scholarship to a prestigious university. There, he had thrived, his natural intelligence and determination propelling him to the top of his class. But it wasn't just academic success that defined Timothy's journey. During his time at university, he had developed a revolutionary software program that caught the attention of major tech companies. Instead of selling his idea, Timothy took a risk with the support of a few key investors who believed in his vision. He had started his own company, and now, 10 years later, that small startup had grown into a successful enterprise that employed hundreds of people and was changing the face of the tech industry. Despite his success, Timothy had never forgotten where he came from. The memory of his mother struggling, the cold nights, and the empty stomachs were etched into his mind. But alongside those difficult memories was another, much brighter one. The day he met Catherine. As he stood in his office, Timothy's mind wandered back to that rainy afternoon so many years ago. He could still picture Catherine's kind smile, still feel the warmth of that simple meal she had bought him. It had been a small act of kindness, but it had changed everything for him. The voice of his assistant, Mr. Evans, crackled over the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Timothy turned away from the window, adjusting his tie.
Thanks, Sarah.
"I'll be right there." As he walked toward the conference room, Timothy's decision was made. He had been putting it off for too long. It was time to find Catherine and repay her kindness. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity between running his company and searching for Catherine. Timothy could barely rest, but the sense of purpose kept him going. He knew finding Catherine wouldn't be easy. Many years had passed, and he didn't have much information. All he had was his memory of the grocery store and her name. He hired a private investigator, giving him the little information he had about Catherine, and he was surprised by how quickly he received a response. Catherine was still living in the same neighborhood, in the same modest house. It was as if time had barely passed for her. Timothy felt a mixture of relief and nervousness when the investigator handed him the address. Finally, one Saturday morning, Timothy found himself standing in front of Catherine's house. It was a small home with a well-kept garden filled with flowers that, despite being simple, filled the space with color. Timothy paused for a moment before climbing the steps. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, his heart pounding. After a few moments, the door slowly opened, revealing Catherine. Her eyes met Timothy's, and although many years had passed, she recognized him almost instantly. Her eyes widened, and a soft smile appeared on her face. "Timothy," she said in a gentle voice, almost disbelieving. Timothy smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Hello, Catherine. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Catherine invited him in, and they sat together in the small living room, the sun streaming in through the windows, filling the space with a warm light. Timothy began to tell her everything that had happened in his life since that rainy day. He wanted to make sure she knew how much it had meant to him and how her act of kindness had changed everything. Catherine listened in silence, her eyes filled with tenderness and pride as Timothy spoke. "You have no idea how much you helped me, Catherine. That meal, that simple act of kindness, gave me the strength I needed to move forward. Everything I've achieved so far, I owe it to you," Timothy said, his voice breaking slightly. Catherine smiled, her eyes also welling with tears. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Timothy. I just gave you what I could at that moment, but I'm glad it made a difference in your life. Not all of us get the chance to know how our actions affect others." Timothy nodded, his hands clenched nervously in his lap. "But I want to do more. I want to give back what you gave me, Catherine. Not just the meal, but the hope. That's why I'm here. I've prepared something special for you," he said as he pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Catherine. Catherine took it, curious, and opened it carefully. Inside was a document indicating the purchase of a new house, completely in Catherine's name. A modern, spacious house in a quiet area, with everything she could need for a comfortable life. Catherine looked at him in disbelief, her hands trembling as she held the paper. "Timothy, I can't accept this. It's too much," she said, her voice shaky. Timothy shook his head, his eyes filled with emotion. "It's not too much. It's the least I can do for you, Catherine. You gave me everything when you had nothing to gain. This is just a small gesture to show you how much you meant to me. I want you to live comfortably, without worries. And if you don't want to move, then use it however you like. But please, let me do this for you." Catherine was silent for a moment, looking at the document and then at Timothy. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, and she leaned in to hug him, a strong and sincere embrace.
"Thank you, Timothy.
You are an incredible man, and I am so proud of you. I never thought something as small as a meal could mean so much, but I'm glad I gave you hope." Timothy hugged her back, feeling a deep sense of peace within. Everything had come full circle. The woman who had saved him as a child was now receiving the gratitude she so deserved. Hours passed, and Timothy and Catherine continued talking. Timothy told her about his company and how he had built something great. But most importantly, he spoke to her about a project he wanted to undertake, inspired by her, a foundation to help children in need, those who, like him, just needed an act of kindness to change their lives. He wanted Catherine to be a part of it as an advisor and as an inspiration. "I don't want this to end here, Catherine. I want us to keep helping others. I want you and me to make a difference in the lives of as many children as we can," Timothy said, his voice full of determination. Catherine, moved, smiled and nodded. "I would love that, Timothy. I'd love to help bring hope to those who need it most, just like I did for you. You can count on me." And so, Timothy and Catherine embarked on a new chapter together. A chapter full of hope, gratitude, and an unwavering desire to help others. Timothy never forgot the hardships of his childhood, but thanks to Catherine, those hardships didn't define him. They propelled him to become a source of hope for others. In time, the foundation they created went on to help thousands of children and families. Each of them received not only material assistance, but also a demonstration that there is kindness in the world, that even a small act can change lives. Catherine, now older, found a new reason to get up every morning in her old age, a mission. And Timothy, the hungry boy who had sat in the rain, became a leader whose very life was a testament to the power of human kindness. What would you do if you were in Timothy's shoes, determined to repay an act of kindness that changed your life in the past? Would you have done the same to honor someone who helped you? Or would you have taken a different path? If this video has helped you connect more with yourself and inspired you on your growth journey, take action and subscribe to the Vidasto Inspiration channel to discover more stories that will fill you with motivation and hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment telling me how this story has impacted your life or what reflections it has left you with. And if you think this message could inspire someone you know, share it with your friends so they too can find inspiration and purpose in their lives.